What's going on, guys? Matt at Middleton Motorsports here. Corvette on the dyno day, so 2017 Z06. So let's jump up here and check this thing out. So this was a Callaway 757 package, and we pretty much retained everything on this thing. So I'll kind of back up a little bit. So he was having some issues. So he bought this car for track use, road race use, like we a lot of the cars I do here for road racing. And he was having a lot of issues with the cooling. And so he was having issues with the IETs being hot, oil temperature being hot, coolant temperature being hot, kind of the typical C7 Z06 issues with heat. Callaway's package is about 15 pounds of boost and just a little bit too much. So I was doing some data logging with it and we were seeing some pretty high IATs with it. So we did a few things to it to try to reduce temperatures. So one of the things he was having an issue with is when the IATs were getting hot, the tank that was here was plastic. And this was actually expanding enough, the one that was on there, the plastic one that was on here, to pop the cap off, and he was losing coolant out of this reservoir, which subsequently was losing coolant out of the intercooler system, which was compounding the issue. And I know I'm kind of working reverse on kind of showing this thing, but I kind of wanted to preface the whole deal here with the goal of this, our package here, and kind of improving on what the car had on it, is to reduce the heat produced by the car. So we're trying to reduce temperatures, coolant temp, oil temp, supercharger temp. So what we ended up doing, and what I ended up doing is, so the Callaway package basically is, it's got this, it's got their 2300 TVS blower, which I believe is an Edelbrock casting, that Callaway does their own lid on. And it's got a decent intercooler setup. It's actually got a 3 intercoolers. So there's an intercooler per bank, and then there's one up in the top of this lid. So it has a decent amount of surface area, just driving a little bit too much boost for the setup, with, you know, for road race use. It just, stuff gets too hot. So I'll kind of start intake. So we did a Cordes Performance 5-inch cold air. What was on there was just like a 3 3/4, 4-inch plastic tube. We did a K-Tech 103 millimeter throttle body. I ported the inlet of the supercharger, so I actually took the supercharger inlet off and ported it to match that throttle body, and did a little smoothing on the inside of that. Big thing that will be a little backwards for a lot of people, but we actually put a bigger pulley on it. So it had a 2.7-inch pulley on it. We went up to a 3-inch pulley, and again, trying to slow the blower down, we're trying to make this thing run cooler. It did have factory manifolds and catalytic converters, basically a stock exhaust. So long tube headers, X-pipe to the factory mufflers. Again, you know, headers and doing a freer flowing exhaust. Headers are coated, so you know, heat, instead of being generated under the hood and in the exhaust port, we help pull heat out of the system with a long tube header that's coated. Like I said, this intercooler tank, we're having issues with this intercooler tank, so I replaced it with a Cordes Performance, the gallon aluminum one with a screw-on cap, so that's not going to go anywhere. And then obviously I'm doing dyno tuning on it. So so far so good. The cooling package on it, I'm not 100%, and I'm sure some Callaway experts will know. It does have a different radiator. It does have different side coolers. So the radiator obviously is for the engine. It does have an engine oil cooler installed up in the front of the grill, and the side coolers are what's cooling the supercharger. So that's why you can see I got some fans set up, kind of blowing air directly in these, because my fan's over here just blowing it through the front, basically just hitting the radiator essentially. So a couple pulls, I've done about 5-6 pulls on it. Boost is down to about 12, and that's about what I wanted. And yeah, IETs are now down manageable. You know, I drove this car before we did any of this work, and just one pull, like a 2, 3, 4 gear pull, the intake air temps were, the supercharger intake air temps were 150 plus degrees, just doing one pull. just on the dyno here, I'm now seeing sub 120. Obviously, you know, but that's, you know, after I was doing some Dyno Pulls, it sits, it gets heat soaked. So far so good. I will mention too, I did put a K-Tech 160 degree thermostat in it. It did seem to run cooler than stock. Like it was maybe a 180 or 185 thermostat. It wasn't. I like the K-Tech thermostats. They're super durable, and I've never had an issue with one on track. Some of the other brands out there, I've had some stick open. I've had one stick shut, which is not good. So I just fall back on the K-Tech thermostats for all this LT stuff. So kind of wanted to talk about that stuff before we look at power numbers, just because this build is not really designed for ultimate top-end power. We're after reliability, and we're after keeping the thing cool so he can do full sessions at a track day. And he was having issues with that. He would run into problems where even if it wasn't, it was coming up with misfires, and even if it wasn't, it was way down on power just because the blower was getting so hot, it was pulling a lot of timing. So the idea is to keep this thing consistent, able to do a full 20-minute session. Some of the stuff in the tune with the knock sensor system was a little aggressive, I thought, with the Callaway tune, with how fast the knock is being ramped back in once it does see knock, or the timing is being ramped in once it does see a knock event. Yeah, just some of the stuff with the tune was a little funky from a road race perspective, as far as, you know, how they had some other stuff set up, you know, decent stuff. But when it comes to just road racing, we start talking road racing, it's just so specific when you start talking road racing and tuning, you know, these V8 cars that are supercharged. You're really trying to you're fighting heat, especially in a Corvette chassis, where the front end surface area, and I kind of jump down here, you see what I'm kind of talking about. There just isn't a lot of grill area here. You talk a 6th gen Camaro or S550 Mustang, you know, your bumper's way up here, and you got triple the grill area. So the Corvettes struggle with that a little bit just because this is so small. So you can see, yeah, there's an engine oil cooler that's added in here, but the side vents here are where the intercoolers are for the supercharger. So that being said, we'll come up here. This is my best pull so far. And like I said, this is hot, 12 pounds of boost, 91 octane. It might seem a little low to some of you guys. You know, you get online and see these giant numbers with LT4s, but I've talked about LT4 stuff way in the past with some of the other videos I've done at the other shop I worked at. And LT4s are very, very sensitive to heat, and when you're running pump gas and you have no methanol spraying and it's just pump gas only. This is a warm run. This is hot coolant, hot oil, 120 degree supercharger temperatures. I know the last video I did, I talked about maybe letting it cool off and seeing a jump in power. The car's been cooling off for about a half an hour. I had the intercooler pump running with the fans on it. So I just want to see this is dialed in hot. So I am letting it cool off. I am going to see with this one, maybe we can see a little bit of a power jump when the car is a little cooler. But this setup like this is about 50 horsepower over stock. And this setup like this should be a reliable package for road race sessions. So yeah, I'm going to set the camera down and we're going to do one more pull on this thing. Car's cooled off. We're going to see if we can see any gain by letting it cool off. But otherwise, yeah, this is where it's going to be. I mean, this is where the timing's conservative. The boost is conservative from a pump gas standpoint. But for a road race standpoint, I think the boost is kind of right to the limit for an LT4 car. I usually don't like, for pump gas stuff, I don't usually like pushing more than 12 pounds of boost on an LT4 for road race stuff. And again, road racing is completely different than street and drag racing when it comes to heat production and consistent. So Road America, I talked about before, there's 2 big straightaways, one right after another. By the end of that second straightaway, even on the second lap, these cars are hot. Anything you're racing up there on a 90-degree day is hot. And again, it's like doing 2 drag strip passes back to back, but then doing that for 20 minutes. So it's just, it hammers the car and produces a ton of heat. And the tuning has to be, you have to be you know, mindful of that when you're tuning these things for road race use. So I'm gonna stop talking, set the camera down. Let's do one more pull and we'll go over the data log and I'll show you guys some of that stuff. And we'll wrap this up. All right, guys. So it doesn't look like we picked up any power from letting it cool off. I actually did two. So I did two more pulls just to see what it would do if I did a back-to-back. Torque's identical, powered down a little bit, about 10, you can see on the top here. That may just be a artifact of having the trans and differential oils cooled off. And because this 601, that was about 4 or 5 pulls in, so drivetrain temperatures were pretty warm, which frees up power. So I'm not too worried about that. Again, the goal of this build is to have this thing able to run 20 minutes without overheating the blower, overheating the train or oil, and overheating the engine coolant. So so Callaway does rate these at 757 at the crank. So that's where we're at right now. So through an automatic transmission, I'm doing these pulls in 5th gear on this 8-speed, which is not the 1-to-1. The reason I don't do 1-to-1 usually on the 8-speeds is because the rear gear on a Z06 like this is a 277, and when you do the 1-to-1, you are going 200 miles an hour up at the top end here. At 6,500 RPM, it's actually a smidge over 200 miles an hour, which the dyno does not allow, so I'm usually cut short when I try to do 6th gear 1-to-1 pulls on these cars. So I do everything in 5th, and 5th is not the 1-to-1. I could do 6th gear. It would read higher. I'd probably get a higher peak number right at the point of where the dyno would shut me off, would hit the brake and stop the run, because the dyno will automatically hit the brake and shut the run down at 200 miles an hour to protect the equipment. So it's just built into the software stack of the dyno. So I do these C7s in 5th gear. Anything 8-speed, usually the Camaros too. The Camaros, similar deal. It's a 277 rear with the 8-speed. The 10-speed stuff you can get away with. Usually the rear gear I think is like a 290 and allows it to just go that much more RPM wise. You're real close at 7,000 RPM on a 10-speed in the 7th gear 1-to-1, but these 8-speeds I got to do 5th gear. So let's take a look at the data log. Let's see what we got. Let me climb in this thing here. Bring this laptop over. Just bear with me. All right, so we'll kind of back this up here. We can kind of look this over. So, start at the top. You can see my white, excuse me, up here is and this is the second run I did. So that's about 11 and a half, between 11 and a half and 12 pounds. And I can actually open up right before I did this pull. I'm going to save this file just while we're sitting here. I always save my full dyno pulls that I do, the ones that I don't have an issue with, or I want to, make sure I want to be able to recall it because I know that the tune was good. And that was about the same boost, 179. That's about 12 pounds of boost right there. So yeah, we're seeing that for boost. Timing. So knock, I have some dynamic knock, or some static knock dialed in on the static knock table, which predeterminedly pulls timing on cylinder number 5. These LT engines, basically the LT4s from the factory pull 5 degrees of timing just on cylinder 5. I'll cut that in half with headers. Once you go a cam car, I won't do any static timing at all. So, but again, road race deal, cylinder 5 is prone to knock, so they pull timing. The factory pulls timing. So you can see top end, I'm right at 21. That's where I was happy. This timing curve here kind of ramping up was what it liked. So I did try to add some time down here. I was picking up a knock outside of my static timing pull. And so I pulled it back down. Timing curve's nice and smooth, ramping up to 21. My air fuel, again, LT stuff, I'll run a smidge leaner than an LS motor, or even a Coyote based stuff. So you can see I'm just over that 0.8 lambda. That's where I usually try to run these boosted LT motors. I'll run them kind of right on the edge there. It's a little lean in this spot, but you can run these things anywhere from 0.8 to 0.83 is where they're going to be happy, especially down the lower end here, where the boost is, you know, 8 pounds. So maybe 9 pounds right here. And you can see as the boost ramps up a little bit, it gets richer towards the top, and that's about as rich I'd want to see. Long terms are adding about 1% here, so I'll correct that on the street. GM ECUs, if the long-term fuel trims are positive under power enrichment, wide open throttle, this does get added on to the wide open throttle fueling. So we're about 1% rich, but I can pull that back out. That's pretty easy. Everything else is looking really good. So you can see that I still do pick up. So the start, so we're gonna go up here. So this is the manifold air temp. That's the temperature of the air inside the blower as it's going into the cylinder head. So starting that pull at 102, you can see it drops a little bit, but then it does start to climb. And that's just the nature of this type of blower. You're gonna have that. The goal here is to, you know, at the top of a straightaway at Road America, to try to hold this under 150. You really want to see these things, you know, in the 130 to 140 range when you're ripping on a road course. You start getting into this like 150, 160. At the rate I was seeing before, I'm sure his intake air temps were probably 170 to 180, which again, you just run into on these LT engines. It's way too hot, and at that boost level, you are pulling 5-6 degrees of timing off the base timing. So. The goal here is to try to hold it under 150, and the timing curve will stay nice and flat, and the thing will have basically the same power on lap 2 as it will on lap 8 or 9. So everything else is looking good. I mean, obviously I pay attention to fuel pulse width on these things, but being on pump gas and this power level, we're not worried about being out of injector or high pressure pump or anything like that in this car, or even low side pump. So yeah, everything's looking good on this. I'm gonna go do some street driving and some trans tuning on it. Make sure I don't think there's any reason to, you know, we looked at the dyno graph again. It's peaking power about 6,300, which is about where a stock LT4 peaks. And the stock shift points on these things are right about 6,400. So I'm just gonna leave the shift points alone. I don't see any reason to have to rev it any higher. Yeah, the 8-speed keeps the, you know, it's a closer ratio trans, similar to a 10-speed, and it keeps the RPM in a pretty narrow band. So we can shift just after peak or right at peak, and you're still holding that thing in a pretty good power band. These LT4s make a lot of mid-range torque. You can see the torque on it was like 635 foot-pounds at 3,500 RPM. So a lot of torque on the bottom end. So it doesn't need to be a real peaky engine, you know, like the Coyote stuff or the Predator stuff in the GT500s. Those, especially when we do the blower reporting, those like RPM, and they like to be shifted 80, 82, 8,300 if you're really after acceleration. So yeah, so everything's looking nice and smooth. My torque, you know, these engines, the ECUs are torque based, so I do log all these torque numbers, and I like to try to keep the commanded torque. Basically, the final throttle torque is this like seafoam line. And I like to try to make that nice and smooth, so the torque command is pretty smooth along the way, so the transmission will shift with similar pressures. This is not all of what dictates the trans shifting, but the commanded torque and then the actual torque are the two things the transmission uses to determine shift speeds and shift pressures. So very important on these things to have your torque model in order. So because the transmission heavily depends on that torque model for what it needs to do. But yeah, that'll wrap it up for the dyno on this car. So I'm gonna jump out here and I'll get this thing unstrapped and we will get it on the road. But yeah, like again, you can see how much torque these things make down low. So it almost gets to the point sometimes where these things there's almost too much. And especially when you have 15 pounds of boost on, this thing would probably be making almost 700 foot-pounds of torque, and it's just not usable. It's not usable in a road race situation because you try to roll onto it out of a corner and you're into the traction control instantly. So especially in the lighter Corvette chassis. But yeah, this is looking good. Power curve looks good. I'm happy with this. And again, ultimate goal is to get this thing cool, and I think we're going to achieve that with this setup. So that'll wrap it up for this video, guys. Thanks for watching, and always check back on our channel and our social medias for new content. We got a couple big track days coming up here in a week or so, and the whole crew will be here, including this car. And we got Blackhawk Farms and Road America. I'll be there with my car. Other GT500s, Corvettes, Jim's Porsche, obviously, and we'll get some content out to you guys from that aspect. But thanks for watching, guys, and we'll talk to you later.